Exodus. They are going to arrive. We're going to try to get through chapter 18 kind of quick. It's mostly a conversation between Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, and just some instructions that he's going to give him. But when we get to chapter 19 of Exodus, they are actually going to be at Mount Sinai. All right? Now, Mount Sinai, they're going to stay there around 1 year. So from Exodus 19 to Numbers chapter 10 is totally devoted to that, to God speaking to Moses. It is one of the longest conversations that recorded conversations that God has with any prophet that we have in the Scriptures. So from Exodus 19 to Numbers 10, it is a conversation between God and Moses. It's basically what you're going to have. And it is instructions and law instructions. It is curses and blessings. But right before they get there, they're going to be in Exodus chapter 18. And we're going to be looking at Jethro, the priest of Midian. You remember that Moses married his daughter, and Moses had two kids. Gershom and Eleazar are his two sons, and they're going to be mentioned. And his wife are going to join back into this conversation. But it's just basically some instructions that Jethro is going to give Moses. Is basically what chapter 18 is about. But we will try our best to try to get into 19 if we can. Now in verse 1 it says, when Jethro the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel his people, and that God had brought Israel out of Egypt, that then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back. So somewhere in between the plagues, we don't know when it was, Moses sends his wife and his two sons back to live with their grandfather and her dad and their father-in-law and his father-in-law. So they have not been in Egypt. We don't know for how long, but they have been sent out of Egypt. So the whole time that the plagues have been going on, and this 3-month trip that they have taken from Egypt to Sinai is basically going to be, he's by himself. Now he's going to meet up back with his family. So he sends them out, brings them back, and now he's going to be rejoined with them. And it mentions his two sons, Gershom, and his name means, I have been an alien in a strange land, which is Egypt. And that is just like us. We are aliens in a strange land. This world is not our home, okay? And then he has another son, Eleazar, which is for God of my father. All right? So those are the two sons. There's his wife, and he's got his father-in-law. Now, Jethro is going to give Moses some very valuable advice. And this just goes to prove that sometimes God puts people in your lives as help. And this is one of these, for instance, look, verse 5, and Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife unto Moses in the wilderness, where he had encamped at the mount of God. Now, they're at the mount, okay? But yet Moses has went yet to go up. So he brings his family, and he says unto Moses, and he said unto Moses, I, thy father-in-law Jethro, am coming to thee, and with thy wife and her two sons with her. Moses goes up and he meets his father-in-law, and he kisses him, and they just basically talk about the journey. And Moses in verse 8, I'm going to try to get through chapter 8 pretty quick. Moses, they just basically have a conversation. This is what's happened. But but Jethro does something very important. And Jethro rejoiced in verse 9 for all the goodness of the Lord which he had done to Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, blessed be the Lord. And he is going to build an altar. He is going to build an altar to God right there, what Jethro is going to do. In verse 11 it says, now I know the Lord is greater than all gods, for in the thing wherein thou dealt proudly, he is above them. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices unto God. How does he know to do this? Law hadn't been handed down yet. See how God is already starting to incorporate the law into the hearts of man? The law's not been handed down at all. They're still under the dispensation of government, or dispensation of human government. So what God has already started to do with mankind is He has already started to put His law into the hearts of man. Okay? So He makes a burnt offering and sacrifice for God, and Aaron came, which is Moses' brother, which is going to be eventually the head of the Levites, and all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law, before God. All right. Now we get to verse 13. And it came to pass on the morrow. Now, you've got Moses all by himself. A few million people. All right. And you're going to see the kind of pressure that he is under. And and it came to pass on the morrow. This is all Moses does, day in and day out. This is it. When he's not traveling, remember they have not got the tabernacle in the wilderness yet. They have yet to even mention that. So what Moses is basically doing is walking and dealing with people's problems. And it came to pass on the morrow that Moses sat to judge the people. And the people stood by Moses from the morning until the evening. You know what he's doing? People come up and tell him his problems, and he works them out. That's all he does. I would get sick of that. After about 30 minutes, I would say, deal with it yourself. If you can't deal with it yourself, go back to Egypt. But all Moses does is he sits there, and he listens to problems. Now listen, if they're going to gripe about God sending manna and quail and nothing to drink, how nitpicky do you think these people are going to get with Moses? That's all he does. And it tells us that he does this from morning to evening. That's all he does, is sit there and listen to problems. He is actually the first psychiatrist that you'll find in the Bible. He listens to people's problems. Now this is, I think God has put Jethro in the life of Moses. I want you to look what happens in verse 14. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he had did to the people, he said, what is this thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone, and all the people stand by thee from morning to evening? He cannot believe Moses has got himself under this kind of pressure. All right? Moses said unto his father-in-law, because the people came unto me to inquire of God. He doesn't gripe about it at all. They're coming to ask him about God, coming to ask him that he basically is going to try to settle all their problems. And his father-in-law cannot believe he is having, one person is having to deal with a few million people. And they come up to him all day long, all night long, belly aching and griping. And Moses, let's go to verse 16. It says, and when they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one or the other, and I do make them know the statutes of God and His laws. Wait a minute. We still ain't got the statutes and laws yet. You see how God's starting to implant laws in people's hearts? People that are born into this world, they know that there is a God. You can't tell me, what about the little ignorant African? There's no such thing as an ignorant African. They can walk outside and look up to the sky and know that something has put that there. God has put His laws into the heart of people, whether they obey it or not, because He has made statutes of God and His laws. So this is what He does. You got a problem, I work it out. And then after I work out the problem, then I start teaching you about God and teaching you about Scripture and theology and stuff like that. He's not getting paid. I mean, to me, it sounds like a kind of a crummy job, in all honesty. And Moses' father-in-law said unto him, the thing that thou doest is not good. And a very wise man. Moses is very lucky to have somebody like this in his life. Thou wilt surely wear away. You're going to worry. And I've seen this happen to pastors of churches. I've seen it happen. A pastor of a church will get in there and they'll just pile everything on him. And it's not the fact that he doesn't have help. It's the fact that he doesn't want to ask for help. And after a while, he says this is going to wear away at you. That is like a rock sitting in a desert, and there's a storm coming every night, and the wind goes against that rock, and it wears it a little bit away, and before you know it, it's all gone. And it says, and this people that is with thee, for this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. Would you like to have this job? People coming up, and I mean, I'm just going to go ahead and, you guys have been amazing. Y'all rarely even call me. I don't know if you don't like me or if you think I want to scream at you or what. But you never bother me with anything. I mean, you can, but you never do. I know some pastors, and no joke, it's just their phones is just like this all the time. I mean, it is. And sometimes you want to look at people and go, can you not deal with, nitpicky stuff. And being a preacher's kid, I've seen it. I mean, I have seen it. Ain't so-and-so who ain't been in church in 3 years just stubbed her toe. Well, let's run over and, that's what Moses is dealing with. If you notice that God didn't outline none of this in the interview, job interview, God didn't say, here's what's going to happen, Moses. They're going to hate your guts when you get there. And then all these terrible plagues are going to come. You're going to be affected by some of them. They're going to gripe and bellyache to you. And oh, by the way, from sun up to sundown, you're going to have to listen to the problems. You notice he left off that part of the job process. But here comes his father-in-law, and he's giving him an amazing advice. Hearken now unto my voice. I will give thee counsel, and God shall be with thee. Be thou for the people to Godward, that they mayest bring the causes unto God. This is his job. If you want to know what Moses' job description is, it is in verse 20. He is to teach ordinances and law, and shall show them the way wherein they must walk and the work that they must do. That's his only job. He is to teach them the book. As pastors of churches, it seems like some churches pile up everything they can on the pastor. That's his job. That's his job. That's his job. In all honesty, you know what the responsibility of a pastor is. A lot of churches don't like to hear this. That's it. What about visiting? It's never in there. The job of the pastor is to preach, be instant in season, out of season. What did Paul tell Timothy? Go preach. Jesus would have never been a good pastor. Do you know why? When they come up to him with John the Baptist, he's in jail. Did Jesus drop everything he did? Let me go run and check on John. What does he do? Sorry. Let me show you some miracles, and then you go back and tell John what you've seen. He wouldn't have made a good pastor for a lot of churches today. My job, I love you guys, but my job is to preach to you this gospel and to instruct and to teach. That's my job. And what they have done to Moses is they've piled up everything on him. And if he had not come across his father-in-law, this would have happened. And I believe he would have died not very long after this. But Jethro comes up and he says, okay, here's what you got to do. Your job is to teach them the ordinances of God. That's it. And then moreover, now this is the beginning of the great Sanhedrin. Now, in actuality, the great Sanhedrin is instructed by God in the book of Numbers when he says, get you 70 men out. And Moses makes 71. But this is the beginning of the Sanhedrins, okay? The instructions. Moreover, let me see where I'm at. Thou shalt provide out of all the people, here's your qualifications, able men, all right, such as fear God. They got to be a man, they got to fear God, they got to be a man of truth, they got to hate covetousness, and place such over them. That's their job. That's what they got to qualify for. Okay? And place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. So you've got certain people. What would happen is they would come up to Moses, and Moses would evaluate them depending on how well they would be able to be over certain groups of people. If he thought you was qualified enough, he would set you over 1,000. If you were probably a younger person, not very well versed in the ways of the world, he would set you probably over just 10 people. And let them judge the people. This is the first time we hear about judges. All right? And then, of course, you have the book of Judges. But this is the first time we hear about judges. Let them judge the people at all seasons, anytime, all the time. And it shall be that every great matter that they bring unto thee, but every small matter they shall judge. If it's a really big deal, they're going to bring it to you, Moses. If it's just something, just ticky-tacky, they're going to handle it. All right? And I promise you, every problem that these people had in their minds was gigantic, size of Mount Rushmore. Okay? It seems like when I have a problem, it's a lot bigger than y'all's. And it's always vice versa, isn't it? But he tells Moses, if it's something great, you're going to have to handle it. But if it's just something small, okay, they're going to have to deal with this themselves. And it shall be, look, and this is it. So it shall be easier for thyself, and they shall bear the burden with thee. All right? If thou shalt do this thing, and God command thee also, then thou shalt be able to what? Endure. Churches, whether you're a deacon, a pastor, Sunday school teacher, whatever, churches can kill folks. I mean, in all honesty, it can. It can really, really wear you down. I've got really good friends that are full-time pastors of churches that have basically said, I can't do this. Y'all going to have to put me on part-time or something because I just can't keep doing this. Because they want to handle everything themselves. They have the deacons to do it, and that usually falls under one or two classes. The deacons want to help, but the preacher don't tell them, I need your help. Or they just don't want to do anything. They just want the job title as deacon. So what has happened is basically you're getting pre-Paul. Before Paul instructs Timothy, this is what a deacon should look like. This is what a pastor should look like. This is how you treat your pastor. This is how you treat your deacons. It comes actually in Exodus chapter 18. You want to see the building of the church, and you'll notice that there are very, very, very few pictures of the church in the Old Testament. But this is one of the very few pictures where you actually start seeing a structure of a church. Okay? He says if you'll do this thing, you're going to be able to endure. It doesn't say you're going to have a great, perfect, awesome life. Just endure. Right now, we're living in a time where we just got to endure. I don't believe, I might be wrong, but I don't think I will. The Bible tells us in the last days, things are going to wax worse and worse and worse. There's not going to be a great revival sweep our nation. You can hang that up. You might have brush fire revivals kind of pop up, but as far as a great revival sweeping our nation, I don't believe that's going to happen. I really don't. I think it is a time to endure, like in the book of Jude. Endure, make sure you're saved, and make sure we get the gospel out. That is our job. And to always continuously look up, look up, look up, look up. Okay? Thou shalt be able to endure, and all these people shall also go to their places in peace. So not only is it going to benefit Moses, it's going to benefit the people. All right? Now, so Moses hearkened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. And Moses chose able men out of all of Israel and made them heads over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Okay? And they judged the people at all seasons. The hard causes they brought to Moses, but every smaller matter they judged them themselves. And Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way into his own land. All right? That's basically what verse 8, chapter 18 is about, is great advice from somebody. And we get advice. I promise you, tomorrow, whether you know it or not, you'll get advice all day long. You may not recognize it, but you will get advice from people. Some of it's going to be good, some of it's going to be bad. But here, with Moses in chapter 18, he gets amazing advice from somebody. And it just shows you the kind of person that his father-in-law was. Moses could have said, listen, oh man, you're crazy. I can do this myself. But Moses listens to what he says. And Moses continues on. And he continues on. And he lives to be, 120? All right. I'll try to get through there as quickly as possible. Now, they're at the mount. Okay, chapter 19. This is it. This is what they've been waiting for. God is bringing his people out. All right? And there is going to be a word that you need to write down, and it is the word sanctify. This is what chapter 19 is all about, sanctification. He uses that word several times, the word sanctify to men and also to women. All right? And he's going to use it in a physical manner, but it's also going to be a spiritual manner. What you're looking at now is you have the application you have the principle of interpretation and application. All right? You interpret the Scriptures, and then you apply them to your life. That is a principle that is called hermeneutics. You have that principle. You interpret these Scriptures, and then you say, okay, how can I apply these Scriptures to my life in some way? So we are going to interpret this, and then we're going to see how we can apply it to our lives. We interpret it through basically a physical sense. But then we apply it to ourselves in a spiritual matter. All right? Just like all of the rituals that you find in the Old Testament, how can I apply that to my life? All right? Now, in the 3rd month, verse 1, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. This is also, a lot of Bible commentators will call this God's pulpit, this great mountain. This is actually the mountain. It's actually called Mount Horeb. Also, it's where Elijah, you remember him from Jezebel. The same day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. So they stay here 1 year. And verse 19, chapter 19 is about sanctification, and then you get into the law. These people are actually going to experience God in a way that they have never experienced Him before. The previous times that they have experienced the presence of God, it is always directed at someone else. The parting of the Red Sea, it was directed mainly, not only to them, but mainly to get Pharaoh and his army out of the way. The plagues. So they're going to experience God in a way that is different. Okay? And when they were departed from Rephidim, and they had come to the desert of Sinai, and had pitched in the wilderness, and there Israel camped before the mount, before God. Same place that you find in Exodus chapter 3, where God first told Moses, you're going to go to Egypt to bring my people out. He has come back to where God is at. All right? Now, God has been with them the whole time, and now it is going to be him and Moses, and him and Moses is going to have a conversation. Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called him out of the mountain. Now, you'll notice that God is not in Moses, and Moses is in God. There's a separation there. Okay? You've got God here, and then you've got Moses here. He can only approach him so far. He cannot get too close to him. You remember when he was at the burning bush, he said, don't come too close. He's actually going to tell the people, we'll get into that maybe, they have to keep a distance between God. That is the difference. I want to say difference in God, the Old Testament, New Testament, because it's the same, but that is how we approach God differently. In the Old Testament, you approached God, and then you could only get so close, but you could not go any further. You remember in the tabernacle in the wilderness, and also Herod's tabernacle, and Solomon's tabernacle, and Ezra's tabernacle. There was only one person that was allowed in that great holies of holies, and that's the high priest. The other people had to stand outside and just wait. They couldn't approach God. Now, it's different. We can approach God. We have God living inside of us. We're living inside God. They did not have that luxury now in the Old Testament. A lot of people's going to get to heaven and say, man, Moses, what was it like to ever talk to God? It's going to be, it was great, but what was it like having him actually live inside of you? So that is a difference that you have in the Old and New Testament. God was with them in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, and even in 2016, God is in us. He's not with us, He is in us. Okay? So you have here in chapter 19, you actually see a separation of man and God. You can only get so close. And the only people that spoke with God the whole time is one person, Moses. People never got to talk to him. God would tell Moses, you tell them that I said. Different now. We have, Moses acts as mediator between God and the people. Now we can speak to God, one-on-one. Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called him out of the mountain, saying, Thus thou shalt say, you tell them that I said, to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. Here's what it is, okay? I want you to notice how the word he uses. Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bear you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. It's all about God, isn't it? Verse 5. Now therefore, if you get to Romans chapter 11, then we are included in this. We're going to be grafted into this. All right? So this is going to be with the Gentiles in the New Testament. The Old Testament is all about Jews. Okay? Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant. Notice that two word, if. If you do this. If you will obey my voice, keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar. That is also us in the New Testament. A peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And he goes on to say, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests. Literally they will in the Old Testament. Because you remember you have the Levitical tribe, and you're going to have David, you're going to have Solomon, you're going to have all of those, the kings and priests and things like that. And you're going to be a holy nation. And these are the words which thou shalt speak to the children of Israel. Now, in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. Somebody find it. 2 Peter. For me, that is always the hardest book in the Bible to find. 2 Peter. 1 Peter 2:9. But ye are a chosen generation. Now remember, God just told Moses this is what the Israel's going to be. But now, it says, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, which in times past you were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. That's Gentiles. That's us. Before, in Exodus chapter 19, if they would have been a Gentile in that bunch, God wasn't talking to them. You remember now when God makes a covenant with them, if you've got a Gentile slave, guess what's going to happen? They're going to have to get circumcised too. All right? So God is talking, you're going to be a peculiar people. And in 2 Peter it tells us, you're going to be a chosen generation, royal priesthood, holy nation, peculiar people. In all honesty, what have we got to be down about? I mean, have you got an offer like that from anybody today? Has anybody ever come up to you and said, listen, I'm going to make you greater than anything in this world? God tells us that we are a chosen generation, priesthood. Here's how the line of order would work in the Old Testament. You had God and the priest. Okay? So we're going to be chosen. We're going to be a priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people. That means different. Not like the world. Okay? That ye should show forth praises of him. It all goes back to God, doesn't it? We're a royal priesthood, a royal nation, peculiar people, chosen generation, and because of that, all of that goes back to God, to show forth praise to him. Okay? But it says in verse 10, but in times past you were not like this. He's talking about Old Testament. But now you're a people of God and have not obtained mercy, but now you have obtained mercy. But now in Exodus, it's just to the Jews. It's just to Israel. All right. Verse 7, and Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord had commanded him. Moses now, we see him actually start acting as priest. You've seen glimpses of it, but right now it is going to be, he kind of puts that robe on and he is going to be acting as priest. God tells him, he tells the children of Israel. All right, he's the mediator. And there are several times that thank God for Moses being between God and his people. God would have struck them all dead. All right? Now I want you to listen to what they're going to say in verse 8. You've got to be extremely careful of how you respond to God. All right? Basically, paraphrasing, I think Solomon and David says, before you make a promise to God or a covenant to God, you better really think about it. Because if you're not going to keep it, don't do it. This is what, now, you got to keep in mind while we're studying the rest of this Exodus, this verse. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. That don't last very long. He's up in the mountains 40 days, and guess what they do? We want to go and calf. But just before him in chapter 19, verse 8, it says, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. All right, guys, here's what God wants you to do. Got to keep His commandments. All right, you go tell God we want to do it. All right, I'll go back and tell God. You know, we don't take advantage, and I don't mean that in a bad way. We don't take advantage of being able to communicate with God. What if you had to every time you wanted to communicate with God, you had to go through somebody like Moses? Now, he wasn't around all the time. You had to speak to Moses, and then Moses would go and then speak it to God. All right. And the Lord said unto Moses, lo, I will come unto thee in a thick cloud. It's always in a thick cloud. In the tabernacle, in the holies of holies, God was represented as that, especially when Solomon built the temple. So God is represented a lot of the times in the Old Testament in a thick cloud. Okay? That the people may hear when I speak with thee, not to them, but they're going to be able to hear what I tell you. See the privilege we have now? God speaks to us through His Scriptures, through His Word. Back then, you could hear Him, but He wasn't speaking directly to you. And it says, and hear when I speak to thee, and believe thee forever. And Moses told the words of the people unto the Lord. All right, verse 10. And the Lord said unto Moses, go unto the people, there's the word, sanctify them today. That word means to set apart, to become holy. That is a really big deal if you're a Christian. Now, sanctification, a lot of people say that's just an ivory tower word. No, it's a biblical word. All right? Here's what it means. It means to be set apart. You've got sanctification. You've got justification and sanctification. Justification, we're going to kind of put this in layman's terms, is when you become a Christian. Okay? Sanctification takes place after you become a Christian. He sets you apart. Now, sanctification does not come before justification. If you do not see sanctification taking part in your life, there's been no justification. It's just as pure, it's just basic as that. If God justifies, He will sanctify. He tells these people they're going to have to sanctify themselves. Go to John 17:17. I don't want to kind of give this much away because that kind of gets into our scripture. But this is Jesus. This is God. Jesus speaking to God. Look in chapter 17, verse 17, talking about sanctification. When you talk about sanctification, it's always when Jesus speaks of it is we are in the world, but the world is not in us. Okay. Sanctify them. No, let's go back to verse 16 of chapter 17 of John. They are not of this world. He's talking about us. Okay? But he's speaking to his disciples, all right, or speaking about his disciples, but also about us. Even as I am not of the world, sanctify them through thy truth, and thy word is truth. How does sanctification come along? Through his word. Everybody's got, that's how you're sanctified. All right? Ephesians 5:26. Yes, I think. Yeah, 5:26 Ephesians. It says that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the W-O-R-D word. This is how we're sanctified. This book. Okay, because this book is truth, and truth will sanctify you. Now, this is how you interpret that. We interpreted that saying that God tells them they have got to sanctify themselves physically. All right? And He will give the instructions of how they sanctify themselves physically. And let them wash their clothes. That's not spiritually. He is basically telling them they've got to wash their clothes. But when we interpret that, but when we apply that principle of application, we apply that in a sense of a spiritual matter. Okay? Because when you're saved, it tells us all through the book of Ephesians, it is like you taking off an old suit of clothes and putting on a clean, fresh suit of clothes. All right? So that's how you interpret the Scriptures. You interpret and then you apply. Okay? Let me see if I can get through this real quick. And sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes. You notice it's just not one day. It's continual. That's what sanctification is. It's each and every day. If you think to yourself, man, I wish I could. I see small steps of me growing to Christ. You know, that's sanctification. Each and every day. Falling more and more and more in love with God. And be ready against the third day. Something always great happens the third day. You ever notice that? Go into the people and be ready against, verse 11. Against the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down and all the sight of the people upon Mount Sinai. I'm going to stop there. The third day is always something great when God shows up. Third day, you remember Jonah? Third day, what was the greatest third day? Resurrection. God makes an appearance. On the third day, guess who's going to make an appearance? God. So that's why I think it's important that you study the